Why the cool down, do you think, of late in Bitcoin? 96, a little over 96 is where it currently stands, 96K.
Well, it's tough to call every 10% twist and turn in a new technology like this, Scott. But it seems to me like traders and people that are more focused on short-term outlooks may be looking at DOGE and saying, well, they may be actually eliminating some of this profligate government spending, which is bad for something that effectively will be the check and balance on that. But when you actually dig into the math on DOGE, I think reality is eventually going to get in the way here. And that if you just look at the U.S. aid situation, right, $60 billion, let's say all of that goes away. Well, that's only 1/30th of the deficit. So you got to do that 29 more times, and they're not going to be able to cut all of that. And then when you actually look into what can be cut, there's a real limit to it. So I think in the short term, Bitcoin is bumping up against some of that outlook perspective, but in the long term, it's inevitable.
I see a bunch of headlines regarding tariffs and Bitcoin, asking the question, should you stay away from crypto because of tariffs? What do you make of that? And is that any of the reason for the recent weakness?
Well, tariffs at the end of the day are inflationary. It's hard for me, to say what every twist and turn means. But again, we look at it from a value investor's perspective. And so there's really two elements to the investment thesis here. One is the conceptual valuation framework. I mentioned before, it's probably the new monopoly, or will eventually get to that level as a check and balance against profligate government spending. And so gold has historically served that role. Bitcoin is going to serve that role in a much better way as it's automated, it's more transparent, it's transportable and more secure, and has a much more clear supply protocol. So from a conceptual valuation perspective, gold's valuation is 20 trillion. Bitcoin's at 2 trillion, so that would imply a fundamental intrinsic value of about $1 million of Bitcoin today. Then second, there's a game theory aspect to it, Scott, which is, at a 2 trillion market cap today, it's approaching 1% of the global basket for financial assets. And so if you don't own any Bitcoin today as an allocator, you're now effectively short the best performing asset for the better part of the past 2 decades. And then the other game theory way I think about it is the U.S. monetary policymakers have an explicit goal to devalue everything you own that's priced in dollars by 2 to 3% a year. So why wouldn't you take 2 to 3% of everything you own and stick it in a system entirely outside of the fiat system? And I think that's why a lot of companies are doing it. If you look at the global landscape today in public markets, a lot of companies are converging on a Bitcoin standard. There are now 70 companies on publicly traded exchanges around the globe that hold Bitcoin on their balance sheets. Everyone knows Strategy and some of these other companies that are much larger, but we have things like Tesla out there holding Bitcoin. There's Mercado Libre. Alliance Resource Partners is a coal company. So there are people adopting Bitcoin treasury strategies more and more every single year. And as other companies see companies do this and outperform, they're going to want some Bitcoin. So, all right, there's only a certain number available.
So 2 to 3%. Maybe is worthwhile, you say. What jumps out to me, too, is the 0% that you have in the Mag 7. You don't own any of them.
No. You look at their spending plans. They just announced $300 billion of CapEx plans collectively over the next year. So part of the investment thesis for a lot of the people buying these names is, well, they have effectively a massive marginal free cash flow margin on all of their additional revenues, which is going to flow to their bottom line. Well, maybe not if they're going to need to invest all this money in other stuff. And if you look at the valuation of small and mid and value names relative to the overall market, we're looking at a historic opportunity, I think, for a lot of small and mid cap names.